Okay. Are we good, Stacey? Yep. Okay, so we can officially call the special joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and EDC of April 22nd, 2021 to order. And Dave, I invite you to do the same.
Okay, we'll call the joint meeting of the Board of Select Persons and the EDC to order.
Thank you. So to start, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. For the record, for those who are just listening, we have in attendance June Strunk, Deb Downey, Dave Hammond, Jim Lathrop, Candy Palmer, Keith Brines, Susan Cullen, and myself, Danielle Cheeseborough. By way of very brief background, which Jim and Dave are welcome to expand on, the circus lot, for those again might be listening to this, is a 6-acre parcel just off of Noyes Ave, which is just off of Liberty Street in downtown Pawcatuck. It's currently owned by the town of Westerly with a legal agreement that the town of Stonington can purchase the property back for $35,000. It's been a long-standing EDC priority to explore this option in this lease, or in this agreement. The objective for today's meeting is to bring the Board of Selectmen and EDC members together to talk about the circus lot. I wanted to thank the EDC, in particular Jim Lathrop and Dave Hammond, for their efforts on this property. And we thought it was really just a good moment in time to get all the members of the Board of Selectmen and staff up to date on the EDC's vision for this potential, for this property and what it could do for the revitalization of downtown Pawcatuck. And my hope today is that we can answer existing questions and leave the meeting with some concrete next steps to further explore the potential. I have 3 specific things that I wanted to be sure we touched on, and then I was going to hand things over to Jim. So for me, one thing is phase 1, environmental results, and what the next steps are for confirming this, as well as what we might need to go back to Westerly Water in regards to the wellheads. The second one is the need for a survey of the circus lot to confirm where the wetlands are exactly, as well as topography and any other areas that need to be explored. And then the final thing is community engagement. After probably these 2 steps, for the potential for the lot, including possible renderings of what it could look like back there, and then engagement of abutting property owners. So that was my 2 cents, and I'd like to give the floor to Jim for anything you wanted to add or share, and then we can maybe go through these 3 or more bullet points.
Okay, we can probably address some of those bullet points straight up. The phase 1 was done, I believe, was last year. And it's a fairly lengthy document, several hundred pages, if I remember correctly. And it again, about half a dozen areas of concern on that were, and the site has been heavily modified over the years. It's not in its natural state. There's been overburden that has been added from the town of Westerly when the wellhead was installed, I believe, in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, and then. It was also adjacent to a parcel, or actually several small parcels that were used as one, from the former Dow Oil Company, which was a service station and a fuel oil distributor. My father actually worked at many years ago, and that sits at road grade. Mostly, it rolls back a little bit. That property then drops off and becomes dramatically and becomes the what we call the circus lot, that 5.7 acre parcel that we're talking about today. It drops off quite dramatically in the back, and then rises up gently to where the fill was added for the wellhead, and then kind of drops down again, and then is relatively level all the way to the river, where it drops into the river. The phase 1 did recommend phase 2. At that point, there are somewhere between 12 and 20 test wells already in the site, iron pipes. That have been there for quite a while. The EDC did fund and perform kind of what we call the baby phase 2, where we took a small amount of water samples, and we did an aggregate soil sample. Didn't find anything in the soil. Found in just the water sample, we found I think it was a trace. I'd have to look back at the report. I did not bring it, and I apologize for that. A trace amount of one contaminant. That was a little bit of a puzzler, but talking to the scientists, and that could have been caused by using WD-40 to take the caps off 5 years ago. It was in that kind of quantity, in that it was that contaminant that you'd find in a lubricating agent.
And Jeff, if you don't mind to pause there, maybe just since we have that was part of the reason to have Deb here to talk about, as a next step, just to secure that question mark that people in the community and the board of finance has brought up. Deb, with your experience on this, I mean, I know you guys have had some email back and forth, but do you think we need to do that second phase, or you said there's previous tests that they didn't reference maybe in that report?
Well, a couple things. Firstly, I mean, the second phase they did, that's fine with some of the soil right there. You know, my hope had been, if we're going to say we're going to buy it from Westerly, have them get rid of the wellheads, abandon the wells, get rid of all that stuff. We don't want that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge possible source of contamination if somebody was to decide to put something.
Just to clarify, it was an aggregate sample. It was 6 separate samples, generally taken from around the overburden area. That was out of my west. It wasn't taken from the 4 corners of the site or anything like that.
No, but you would want that anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
But just to clarify what was in there, if it wasn't characterized in the report that specifically.
and I don't recall what was in the water sample, but I believe I tended to agree with you that it wasn't something.
You know, it wasn't something you'd see, I guess, in a
Yeah.
typical. What I was told by the engineer, that's something you see in a typical site that was without kind of.
Yeah.
Who did the testing?
That was crop. It was crop environmental.
Who's that?
Sally Crop Environmental. She's very well known in this area.
Okay.
So
I noticed that they do have an LEP, so they did have an LEP work on the first one.
They had LEP and then I believe LEP on the second one as well. He actually pulled samples.
Do we feel like we need to explore a second one, or are there
You know, I
questions
think
to go back
it's
to them about?
premature to do a second one because generally you would tailor your phase 2, you know, unless there was a real screaming outstanding issue. I know they talked about the off-site issues, but that Dahl property, in theory, has been closed by DEP, by the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm supposed to say DEP. It's been closed. It would be nice to get a copy of that. I would actually want to see a copy of that because that was the issue of, is anything moving onto the site? Would that matter if we weren't building a building? Maybe it wouldn't even matter, but it would be nice to see that and confirm that it's closed. When I looked at the phase 1, I saw that the site was actually a deep lead as opposed to an LEP lead, that Dahl site, which means it would be up to deep to close it as opposed to having an LEP verify that it was closed.
And can we just inquire with Deep, or how would we find out?
We probably would have to do a FOIA or inquire with them. The deep person that worked on the site has retired, so we'd have to find out who actually. I'm sorry, it's on. I turned it off, but turned on the main. We'd have to, find out who actually is working on that site and see what we can find it from them, or we just have to do a freedom of information request from Deep, which I've done a couple other times. My other concern with the phase 2 is we'd want to know what our plans might be, because you'd want to tailor any additional sampling to where you were going to develop,
If at all. So
If
the
at all.
survey, yeah. So the survey would really come first, and then any potential further. Okay. So we'll figure out who somebody will follow up with Deep on the Dahl oil lot just to get confirmation. But then, and then we'll maybe do another walkthrough at some point with Westerly Water. Dave and I had done one like a year ago, right, Dave?
Yeah.
And they were very, very nice.
Yeah.
But maybe to come with some requests and to see how they feel about officially abandoning the wellheads and what would stay or go, what they feel like they could take on financially versus what would come to us.
I mean, I'd be interested in doing a
walkthrough. Yeah, maybe do a walkthrough. Sorry, Jim. So keep going.
Do we need to get Westerly permission to do any of this?
Yes, and I did
You're
get
being
permission
asked
from
to
them.
unmute yourself. To unmute, press star 6. You're being asked to unmute yourself. To unmute, press star 6.
Technology.
What?
Westerly confirmed yesterday that they're fine with us going on to do the survey of the lot whenever we want to do it. They've been really, really nice about this. But we didn't
and
get
we
it
let them
in writing.
know ahead of time, like with the testing and everything else.
Yeah.
They're fully aware that we've done that.
Yeah, they've been great partners.
I
in
think
that.
it says in the deed also that if they abandon use as a water source, that Stonington is free to go on and do anything we want. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yeah, except that we would like them to do a few things, so we want to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
a
They've
good,
been
a good thing.
Yeah,
for-
they've
yeah.
been
Sure.
really, really nice about this. I mean, when Dave and I even met with them, they said it's only $35,000, but you could pay us in yearly increments if you need to. They were very nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure. about
But yeah, we do have some potential requests, so we'll want to block that. But then, if there's nothing else on the environmental, do you want to go to the survey, Jim?
Yeah, so we received a quote. We have it in here. Just bear with me for a moment. We received a quote from Trenzia. Who was somewhat familiar with the site. Supposedly there was a survey that our Hayward had. Nobody could find it. Supposedly there was something that the town of Wesley had. No one could find it. And it was probably not digital, and it was probably very dated anyway. So, so we got a quote for Trenzia. Is very familiar with the site. He does a lot of the adjoining properties and so on and so forth. The quote for the survey was 10.8. We didn't compete it, but I asked around with someone, and it seemed reasonable for the size lot and the condition of the lot. So we didn't go much further than that. And wetland delineation.
Other people.
What's that?
We might want to ask a couple other people based on my experience
Yeah.
in surveys recently.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay.
It seems high.
that seems high.
It seems high.
Yeah.
For that
I would
size
agree,
lot.
yes, yeah.
All right. And again, some of the lot was very
Building.
overgrown and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. So that's
Yeah,
the hard
that's
part.
somehow.
Getting the points. Yep.
Um,
But we could do that. We're in leaf out territory, so we may lose some time if we do that. So we just have to keep that in mind. So the site is quite dense in some areas. I would say at least 50% of it is very over. It's not very bad right now because we're not nothing started growing yet. But and then the wetland delineation letter of findings, that additional 2,100 for I think it's 12.9 total.
Would you repeat yourself? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
It
What's
was-
the last part?
The wetland delineation and letter of findings.
So
will
who would
be
do
it.
the wetland delineation?
He would hire a soil engineer and do it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So on that part, just really quick, while we have Candy and Keith here, I guess two questions. So one is, I'd like to talk just briefly about wetlands, but then also, do we typically, on the town side, do we have anyone else we ever go out to use for survey assessments, or that'd be a question for
Not
Craig?
Not in my experience. I haven't hired someone to do that.
Those guys in London, are they in business anymore? We used to use some of the guys in London when we had work down.
There's a lot of surveyors in the area that we deal with, that submit applications to us, but not that.
But not
we
that the
have
town
hired.
has used.
No, usually, for wetlands, we usually use CLA.
Oh, yeah. They'll survey too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had them doing something for them.
And then again, what is the maximum before we need a bid waiver to hire somebody and not go out to bid?
This is professional services, so we don't
That's
have to go
professional?
out to
Okay,
bid
all right.
for this. But we do, Jim Sullivan will have to review any contract for any language and everything, and then sign off on it. But so maybe we could try really quickly on our site, since we already work with CNL, maybe we could ask them for a quick estimate informally, and then just compare it. And again, we could send some pictures of the site. Like you said, it might be more complicated than people are giving it credit
Yeah.
for, given the topography and the density and kind of the access points. And I know Trenzia does great work, so we can try and quickly move on that. But like, Kim, I had a question for you on wetlands. So let's just say, hypothetically, like if on the GIS, it looks like it's almost all wetlands, but you guys are saying that's usually not very it's not accurate. But so if there are wetlands, what can we still do with the property?
Walk on it.
So like you're allowed to walk through the wetlands and do trails.
Yes, yep, you can create trails, but it's some common sense is utilized whether you can't put fill in, but you can put boardwalks down and things to walk over the wetlands. You put a down tree this way and then boards across it.
Is there any situation in which
It'd be a perfect thing for a Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout project.
Susie or different
Just mentioning that. Because I had somebody else do one.
Oh yeah, and Jim and Dave jump into, but is there any situation or potential where you're allowed to do like any sort of driveway if it's done,
Not without a wetlands permit.
and is that possible or is that?
or wetlands fill. Anything's possible.
Okay.
Anything is possible.
But what, I guess what has it, is it frowned upon environmentally to
To
like
fill the wetlands?
Yeah.
Yes.
for even like a small driveway area?
Yes.
Right. And then were you mentioning though sometimes you can offset it like in another area, like add to wetlands in another area?
That's correct. Yep. If there's small amounts.
Uh-huh.
And the site is, I got this rundown from a soil engineer. So, yes, if it's, if the whole thing's wetlands, obviously it would be pretty tough to do that.
Yeah. But if there was a segment of the site that isn't wetland, there is the potential in here to do that, or that, I know you were on wetlands for a long time too, so I'm looking at you as well.
No, I'm looking at Candace.
Creating a wetlands, it usually doesn't work. Enhancing a wetlands, in other words, if there's one that's in trouble, garbage has been put in it, or for whatever reason, and you want to clean it up, that's an enhancement of a wetland, and they like to see that.
Okay.
But to try to create one, it doesn't usually work.
Yeah, that's not.
It's allowed, but it doesn't work. And then usually when we do something like that, it's on a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you fill the bucket up once, you need to empty it twice. So.
The unfortunate part about the site now is its current use is as the dumping ground and sometimes encampments. So I think we can all agree that it's probably not ideal. So, because it's thickly grown, there are paths in there, and people stay there for sometimes months at a time. Apparently, that some of the encampments are pretty vast, and complicated. So,
there could be an enhancement right there on the site where you're removing invasives and restoring it with native plants.
It
So,
doesn't mean
Better
we
wetland
can't
area.
remove it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So were there other specific questions?
No, I just wanted to, because I didn't know how long both of you guys could stay. That's helpful, and I think obviously all signs point to the survey is probably the most critical next step, because that way we know what we're actually working with. So thank you guys for taking the lead on trying to figure that out. And then, so anything else on the survey part?
No.
Okay. So then the last one is the big one. So kind of, and this is where you guys really take the lead too. I mean, what are your thoughts about like community engagement? And I know you guys have talked about possible renderings and also like the timing for meeting with potential abutting property owners. And I'm sure I'm missing other steps that should happen in there.
Yeah. As far as abutting property owners, you're kind of in a nice situation there, because one of your abutting property owners is Pawcatuck Fire Department, and it's really their parking lot.
Yeah.
That's a significant portion. Part of the circus lot site abuts against some of the Noyes Avenue properties, and I believe even the next avenue over, there's a couple of long backyards kind of near the river. That would be Walnut Street. Walnut Street.
There's 5 properties.
5 properties. Quite a few of them are not owner occupied. I'm not sure what the engagement level will be. I wonder, given what's happening on the site now, I wonder how much pushback there would be if it was made a nice park. I don't think a lot of people would be upset about that, but you never know. I mean, opinions vary, and this town can surprise you, I guess. But and
then Liberty Street.
And then Liberty Street. So you have the Ham's Wine Cellar. It's commercial, and there's a multifamily there. I guess it would depend on the tenant.
And is all of Liberty Street up until the fire station PV5, or does it cut off sooner?
No, it's up to Lincoln Avenue
and
Noyes. Yeah, so that's all PV5 right now. I have a couple of handouts for people, especially if you're not as familiar with it. You guys are going to know this like the doctor.
So the railroad tracks active? The railroad tracks, are they active?
Yeah,
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
So that's,
yeah.
That's
But
all
they're way up in the air there. I mean, there's a huge grade difference.
Yeah,
Is that enough copies for everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Stacy, do you need one for the record? I'll get one after.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we walk this, I'm trying to remember, like, is it still the circus lot property, or are you onto someone else's property at the point where you would have to go like all the way up that steep hill to get to the railroad and then cross over to like Campbell Green?
Right. So you're actually on Amtrak property when you start going up that.
Okay.
I think
Does
it's
it
a 20
abut it?
Easement, or is it?
I think it's 20. It's not, I don't think it's an easement. I think they have it, and I think I'd have to check the deed. It's my understanding, and I believe it's at least 25 feet laterally. Okay, so that's what they try to do, I guess, because that's consistent with what's on the other side. Because we looked at that.
Yep.
So this first thing, I just wanted to kind of orient everyone. Orient everyone to where we are in Liberty Street. So This is an old 2014 idea, not for the circus lot, but for the 4 lots that form up the old Doll property. Okay, this little wedge here was a Family Dollar application. It was going to be part of a Family Dollar. This was something supplied by the person who owns this lot. This never happened. That was really before any civic engagement I had with the town, so forgive me, I don't have the history on it. I understand there was some resistance to this particular application.
Do
So,
you remember this?
Yeah, this only went before the Architectural Design Review Board as a preliminary first look at it.
yeah.
So they never had formal applications.
Yep.
In the corner it says approved, but it just means it was approved by some
The print.
Family Dollar person.
Yeah. So, so this could have happened. It didn't. It still could. The application for a Family Dollar or a similar type business there. I think zoning wise, just at first blush, something like this would fit. And then, as you notice here, the part that comes out on the GIS, the 100-year flood zone, is in that little corner of the property. I believe that's where the cliff drops off, if you will, down to the lower part of the site. So the COM multifamily, I believe, is Ham's Wine Cellar, and the COM multifamily, there's 2 multifamily properties, and then Pawcatuck Fire Department. So I put the notes on here, just hand wrote them, so everybody can kind of get orientated if you're not going up and down that road every day like some of us are.
It's a fish market. So this.
The fish market is further
Yeah, okay, all right.
It's right
further
next to
down.
it, yeah.
And that's like Charter Oak.
Yep.
right?
Yeah, Charter Oak and
So-
Dairy Queen.
So I wanted to flip over and then orient everybody to where this is, and kind of where that wedge is, and where the circuit lot is. Just circuit lot is in relation to the river, in relation to the railroad tracks. I think this answers some of the questions on proximity. So the Pawcatuck Fire Department lot is provided as reference. You can see this DB Properties has about 250 feet of linear frontage. It involves 4 separate lots over, and in some is about 2 acres, just shy of that, I think, 1.98 or something like that. So, and you can see how it intersects with the circus lot here, and you can see how Noyes Avenue access to the circuit lot kind of fits in. So this is the same wedge that's on the front sheet for the old Family Dollar application, just so you can see how it lines up. Now you see that the circus lot is about 3 times the size of the circuit lot. What you can't see on this, because I couldn't represent it very well, is the topography. So on the back of the DB Properties lot, which is incidentally owned by the same individual that just got approved for the South Broad Street Dunkin' Donuts site, where the pastry shop, as it's called in the application, is somebody we've been able to engage because we got familiar with each other during engagement with him there. So, these are how the 2 lots come together. So conceptually, we wanted to, and this would be the 3rd one. Look-
Where's the Doll, is DB Properties?
That was Doll
coincident
Oil.
with the
That was Doll Oil.
Okay.
Pretty much. Yeah.
The
So-
arrowhead-shaped one, I think, was
Yeah.
the main
Okay.
doll
Yeah.
property.
So, wanted to look at a concept for this site, and I'll explain what this picture means. When you look at the topography of the site as it exists, from the little cul-de-sac at the end of Noyes Avenue down that little lateral little run with the hash marks in it, that is actually raised up, and it kind of grades up towards the railroad tracks as you raised up for the wellhead. And I think that was done to keep it out of any flooding that might. I'm guessing that was done to keep it out of any event that would happen there, or maybe just you had to set your z-axis for the wellhead. I don't know, but something like that. So it was raised up quite a bit. It's probably 10 or 15 feet higher, but it creates kind of a delineation between. I mean, the part that's marked R and the part that's marked public, with the exception of that little raised up area in the middle, is about at a few feet above sea level and fairly level. I mean, I think at some point in the past it looks like it was graded, probably when the circus lot had circuses.
For
You probably
circuses.
need a big flat plate.
I was going to ask
So-
that. Everyone
Yeah.
refers to it as the
Yeah.
circus lot. I've lived here for almost 25 years. I've never seen the circus there. How long ago
I
was
think
the
this is
circus
like
actually
World War
there?
II era,
Okay.
something like that.
Back when we had boxing in downtown Pawcatuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Price
Yeah.
I was just curious.
So-
Because everyone
so-
refers to it that way now
Yeah.
by an address.
The circus lot.
Oh.
Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No problem. So a concept for the site is if you imagine this hash mark as a road. Okay, and I'm not going to say this is a good spot for a road, a bad spot for a road. I'm just This is
an
very,
idea.
very idea. Very, I think it's a decent idea conceptually.
Conceptual.
What if you took a portion of the circus lot, the least desirable, probably from a public standpoint, because it's the furthest away from the river. The site does grade a little bit better along the railroad tracks as opposed to falling off as a cliff. The cliff gets higher between C and R as you go towards the Pawcatuck Fire Department. Had this be a commercial establishment, sell this part of the circus lot to that person for a residential component. Couple of advantages. Least desirable part of the potential public space. You still have a significant amount of public space by the river. You can't really build
The R's
RV residential. Yeah, C commercial.
And but you're
public.
including the 100-year flood zone in that last.
I'll get to that at the end because that flood zone is not that accurate.
I just
Not the
for
flood zone, but
yeah,
the-
I just want to say before we keep going for anyone listening now or later,
Yep.
for the record, again, this is a concept, and if the town were to even purchase the circus lot and then were to consider selling it, would have to go through the town charter process for open bids and selling and town meeting and everything. So I don't want anyone to think we're hashing out. It's just we're hearing a hopefully exciting potential idea for how to look at the circus lot. But keep going, Jim.
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so this would be, so let's say another 2.5 acres. It's drawn, fairly inaccurately. With road access here, the commercial lot becomes a better spot for higher end businesses because they look for a crossroad. Much like CVS in Westerly on Granite Street is located next to John Street Extension. Doesn't even have to be a light there. They just want a place for traffic to be slowed down or interrupted. They want to be on a corner. So you create a little bit better spot by doing this. So you're creating some value.
And just to add to what Jim said, I know when we've talked with the police and fire and everybody, whenever we've talked about even just trying to make this a park, they want access off of Liberty Street for sight lines and safety, so this goes kind of hand in hand with that.
Right.
Yep. And you'd need access to do anything anyway. So from a standpoint, if the commercial site up here was graded, and again, the concept would be at the Route 2 grade, dropping off to a grade to do residential, but significantly below the Route 2 grade, so it would hide it a little, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you would have a road here as a delineator, and then public access. And it's significant. I mean, there's still 3.5 acres down here at least for public access along the river, where you wouldn't want to really build anyway, ever. And so now through potential sale of this land, you could generate revenue to do the public park without having it funded by the taxpayers, at least in its entirety, conceptually. And also, that could be seed money for matching grants from state or federal organizations. And maybe it would be easy to go get if that was already allocated conceptually. So you have commercial, you go downgrade, residential, a road as a delineator overlooking a park. So for the person that buys the property, it makes it more valuable because you're overlooking a desirable park. And again, without this is a concept. These are blocks and magic marker on a piece of paper, but to get some buy-in that this idea should be advanced would be good.
Also, we're talking about a dull oil lot that's been vacant and derelict for decades that we're trying to get activated and productive use, and a circus lot, same thing.
Yeah.
Decades and decades, it's been a trouble spot for Stonington, for police and fire. And so these ideas that Jim has just presented are a way to provide value to Stonington, productive use, and also public amenity.
Yep, and I'd say just for those newer that are listening, I'd say you guys have a good proven track record, because I'd say it's different but similar to what you did with the owner of the long vacant Campbell Grain lot, trying to engage and help and walk through process of another long vacant lot. And I know we're still a little ways off with that, but we're better than we were a few years ago. So you guys are very creative and good at this. Do you guys have questions? Or Keith, I know you're going to have to run out. Do you, from a zoning perspective, I know this is very early and conceptual, but...
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are just, the slopes are very steep there, so putting a road in there, and how much wetlands fill you need to do that, but something we could look into.
Anything besides, I guess the other thing is the idea with using the PV5 versus, I think the example Jim gave at the front, at least to me stood out as a good example of like what could be there with all this parking up front and the pushback versus like PV5 where it's the up to the street level, hopefully it's built out, the parking's behind it, aesthetically and
Right.
planning wise. I think it's a nicer for the community. But is the flood zone part of this, and has that been challenging?
Okay, so most of the almost all the circuit slot is in the flood zone,
Yeah.
except for the parts that stick up that are above grade because of the fill that was put in by Westerly, 40 years ago. So I would say if that fill wasn't there, I think maybe the whole lot would be, or 90% of it.
So in
it is
that R, is that all filled at R?
No. It looks, if I had to take a guess just by walking the back of the site, and I would encourage you, especially you, to do that in terms of your environmental background, because that's the part that is closest to where Dal Oil is. It looks like there was probably naturally a grade that went down towards the river, and it looks like it was pushed up and supported, and there's like a little bit of a retaining wall there formed by some big boulders and stuff that were front. It was pushed up, and maybe whatever is on Liberty Street was pushed back to kind of make a more of an angle there. It's more dramatic as you get closer to the Pawcatuck Fire Department, and I'm not sure if this is when they built the rail trestle or not, but it's not quite as dramatic a fall off there. I mean, you can walk it, you don't have to jump off. So it's not quite as bad back there. I'd encourage you to, while it's still not overgrown, to walk back in the site and just kind of check it out that way, towards the doll lot. You can get back there now.
But so is the R in this image mostly, is it in the flood zone or?
It's all in a flood zone.
The R.
You
R
bet.
is policies.
You would have to grade. You could either build for a flood zone or grade out in the area you built a building.
So I just know, Keith, I'm trying to remember when we met with Deep back in February about Stillman. Do they, even if you build up, do they let you build in a flood zone? Or is it?
You can build in a flood zone, but don't confuse a flood zone with an inland
Yeah.
wetlands.
Yes, no,
Two
I know,
different
yeah.
things.
The Stillman Ave site is partially in the floodway,
Way, okay.
Yes,
which
that's
is,
different.
where the floodwaters are rushing at you. And
Okay, so
I don't
it's
think
different
that's the
than a
case here, although I don't have the map in front of me.
The floodway is
be
used to be
closer to the
termed
river.
the wave action zone. It was
Okay.
where waves could actually sort of crash in and make. And then they started with technologies about bringing things up above those levels. But there are still places where they build in the flood zone, but they're not the floodway. But they do a lot of what Jim was talking about they have, garages underneath or breakaway doors or windows.
Yeah.
And it's above living,
Okay.
you're talking about the first level of living space as opposed to the first level of the building.
Right.
And then Candy, though, to your point, Leslie, don't confuse this because if that is wetlands, then so that's why the survey is really important to first figure out what's back
Right.
there.
So there's really two things. The survey, because there are not accurate topographics of this area. Just even walking the site and looking at what's on the GIS, it looks like a slit. You don't see the hacked changes, and it's just different than that. So, and I don't do surveys. But you can see on the survey where the gradient lines are not.
Yeah.
So the survey would help if it was not wetlands and you had to fill or move earth around it. You would know the quantity you would have to move around and where,
Yeah.
based on accurate, GIS points and so on and so forth, and the elevations they would shoot on site. You would get all these elevation points. You do a volume calculation, say, well, if we had to move it, move this earth over here, this many truckloads to build up. That's all yardage calculation. And it may be at that point it's not economical to do so, even if it all was not inland wetlands, because it would take too much, or just not be practical. But we have to get the survey first, or we won't.
The survey will answer a lot of questions.
But I'm
The
sorry. Go ahead.
topographical one and
And
also
the wetlands
wetlands.
for
Yes.
Yeah, so the wetlands is really a separate thing. That's a soil scientist where you go in there and he takes borings and says this is this type of soil and this is this one. So
Boring work.
yeah, they're interesting people. They're interesting guys.
Just a great science.
Yeah.
Just, Jim, do you mind if before we leave, if I just, or you could email to me, but get a copy of the current survey contract?
Sure.
Just so I could see kind of exactly what's included, and like
Yeah.
he said, just since we already work so closely also with CLA, just I think they'll be able to get us back a quote pretty quick, since they already do a ton of work for the town, just to
Yeah.
see what we're comparing.
Compare
So at least
Yeah.
you have a couple of
Two,
quotes,
yeah.
and if they're very different, then you get a third, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they'll be able to see what the other. They watch the video, they'll know what the competing is. So the so as far as the wetlands delineation, we at this point, best information we have is that the wetlands map is not accurate. It does not appear to be substantially wetlands.
Oh, there, it's also this, the
Yeah.
overlay for the soil conservation book, and really it's just another management tool to make us look at a lot of, give it a lot of stuff.
Check it
to
out.
look. Yeah.
So as a courtesy, we had a soil engineer walk it free of charge for us, just to give us a preliminary view of it. And I'm going to, rather than reading the whole thing, he actually did a lot more than I thought. But he conducted, it was a Venus Environmental Services. They're licensed in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Visual inspection of the property, remote sensor review. So basically that means they looked at the GIS and overlays and so on and so forth and walked the site. The property is dominated primarily with invasive species, including multiflora rose, Russian olive, Asiatic bittersweet, and Murray's honeysuckle, among other species. The primary vegetation on the lot is considered indicative of upland areas. The USDA NRCS soil survey maps for this area lists 3 soil series mapped within the lot. He attached a data layer from the soil survey map with this letter. So what that's saying is he used the USDA NRCS soil survey overlay on this GIS point to find out what they said, as opposed to what I believe is a DEP layer that you would look at for wetlands, right? And they weren't consistent. And none of the soils mapped by that USDA survey are considered hydric soils. So it goes on, and a lot of this is, I think, standard fare. To confirm my opinion, was find the location of these features. A full wetland delineation would need to be performed. And he takes a stab at a preliminary. We just got these a couple hours before the meeting, so forgive me.
So it's the sort of the more topography kind of survey, and then the wetlands delineation soil survey.
Yep,
Correct.
So and this is not. I talked to him on the phone also before this, and there's an area along the river that is going to be, and I'm going to hold this up. It's going to be very difficult to see because it's small. Okay, I think I just got this, guy, so I print out one color copy. That's all I had time for, and the color you needed. So you see all this stuff down here along the river, and then you see a little spot down here.
Yeah.
It's about 1,500 square feet. Okay, based on, did he take and record, 500 core bores? No, he did not. But I think he got enough information to know that we were heading in the correct direction. But the reason why we did this, and I took the charity of that was offered, is because for free assessment, is that if he walked the site for 15 minutes and goes, this all over the place, because these guys, this wasn't the case there.
That's helpful. And then I guess just you made me think of it. So like if it is all, say just as an example, wetlands, obviously all along the river, from Deb and Candy's point of view, there are things though if we wanted to have like a kayak launch for kayak trail conversations we've been having, that is doable through wetlands in a safe way.
You just would, if it was, let's say he walked in and said this is 65% wetlands, you probably wouldn't want to start designing a residential site there because it would be very
We could
problematic.
have like a Eagle Scout kayak launch. Okay, no, that's really helpful. Deb or June or Keith or Candy, any questions? Or any thoughts on do these next steps seem to make sense?
You need to get a survey before you figure out what your next step is.
Yeah.
I think it makes more sense to do this before any kind of phase 2.
You're absolutely right, because if we don't know what we're going to do to it, then you don't know what kind of phase 2 to do.
The phase 2, I believe, was as quoted, but again, not specified. The specific task was generalized. I think it was 22,000, something like that, for phase 2 on the site. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll wait on that. So we'll kind of cross
just
off one.
remember.
Although we will ask Deep about the doll lot, just in case anything creeps over.
No, I
and
think it's
if it's
worth
closed out, then we maybe know more certainly. We'll look at the 2 survey inputs and get, hopefully move quickly on a contract potentially, and then, once we get that information, maybe then we'll circle back about the kind of, key stakeholders and community engagement and that after the survey's done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I
know
just,
what we're dealing with first.
Yeah.
yeah.
You know,
So,
because, you know, more community engagement is kind of tough when we don't know, you know, is the site
We're-
90%
What's
wetlands
possible.
or 20%
Yeah, we're way in
wetlands?
front of community
Yeah.
engagement.
should we just quote CLA as part of EDC? I suppose we could get a quote.
Yeah, or if you want, like I said, if you send me that, or just, we can scan it really quickly for really the crux of the, what was asked, like what the scope of work was for Trenzia. I think through Public Works, do you guys do a lot of stuff with CLNA too? You do?
Well, that used to be our outside contractor for everything.
Yeah.
For outside, so yeah, we can just quickly pin them.
So you would like to do the bid on this?
Not a
if
bid,
you will?
it's just an informal inquiry
Okay.
to somebody that
I
the town.
just want to make sure I know what to do. after
Yeah,
the
no,
meeting.
we won't ask for a formal bid process, because that would
Yeah.
take months, just an informal inquiry of a scope of work, and hopefully they could turn that around in a couple of days. And then we could see if they're like, oh yeah, this is probably right around that same thing, since you've already engaged Trenzia, it probably makes sense to stay with that, but if they're like, you know, this is $5,000, maybe we bring them in for a conversation.
So the other question I have is, for our original concept of this was, and I saw your communication on it, was going to be a cost share with the gentleman who owned the DB property site, and you said you'd rather go the whole way with the town on this. If we're going to go that way, how would it be funded? From
So-
what budget pool?
Could you?
I think
What
the
is he
best,
talking?
just
Yeah.
how to
What
fund
is
it,
that?
just how to fund the survey, and
so-
I think, I'll jump ahead.
So
I think-
just to answer the selectwoman's question, EDC was going to fund 50%, and the person that owned the adjacent lot was going to fund 50% as a cost-saving exercise.
For the survey?
You bet.
Yeah, and I think for governance and accountability and transparency perspective,
Yeah, I don't
we
like
need to
that
keep
one.
it as town funds.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
again, EDC has funds for this, so kind of half can come out of the EDC line item and half can come out of most likely that, I'm confirming with Jim Sullivan, but in the first Selectmen's budget, there's a town-wide and community engagement line item. So I
Okay.
think the other 6,000 could get pulled, because it was about 12,000, right? Total?
Yeah, for everything, yeah.
So I think the 6,000, just again to be fully transparent and get ahead of any potential community concerns that any backroom deals were happening or anything like that, we just have to be really
Perfectly
above
understand.
board. So, and again, for especially, I mean, it's so kind of this person to offer that, but we just want to be, put our best foot forward. So I think if for $6,000 we can figure that out.
Well, even if it is 6, if we got a quote that's less.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we'll see, and then, like I said, the contract, hopefully, if we can figure out the provider, we can have Jim Sullivan review the language for just the legal risk indemnification stuff that he has to add to everything, right? And then, usually, would something of the scope, Stacey, would the town attorney still need to review it, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, the town attorney would review it, and then that usually just takes a couple of days, and then we could hopefully move on it, because you said, right, that it's best to do it before really, what?
We're on
Already,
the precipice of it
It's,
already.
Yeah.
as soon as it gets warm, everything's going to bust out.
It's already starting on site.
You need to get in there quick.
Yeah.
She can send, tomorrow I'll just ask her, so we can get a quick turnaround.
I can't.
Right,
We just don't want to lose another year, that's all.
Of course.
Yeah.
no, definitely not. Okay, no, this is, any other questions?
So who's responsible for the inquiring with Deep about the doll closure?
I'll try to inquire.
Debbie's going to do that, and then Jim for the soil survey. That's different than the topo survey. So we need to get.
It's already in the quote. It was a line item.
It's already.
We're
Oh,
gonna
the
do it.
2,000. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was in the quote. So
And
that.
that's a pretty standard. I mean,
So CLA would do.
that's a pretty
So when you get the
standard-
CLA.
that cost is right in line with
Yeah.
what,
They
you know,
said they
Canadian
do, they do surveying and soil surveying, so we'll ask them to give
They
the
have to do.
full-
Yeah. They would want to quote both.
It's interesting with the soil science. It said everything on the other side of the going down to the river from the area that was filled by Westerly, none at all, except for right next to the river. It was only that one little spot. It's actually very close to the Route 2 side. It's just where everything kind of drained down and held. So there was a little spot down there. So it was kind of interesting and kind of counterintuitive to me, at least, that the wetlands would be the furthest away from the river. But that's the way it is.
Anything else from you guys or from you? Anything we missed?
That's just
No?
good.
I thank you, Sloan, for all your work on this. I mean, I know you've been doing the cleanups back there for years, but this vision is exciting. So thank you. Keith, anything? You're good?
I'm sorry?
No, I just didn't know if you were
Yeah, I'm good over now.
looking at the time or
Okay.
I think we're good. So we'll officially close the meeting at almost 4:45.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.